Hello, this is Nathan Webb. This is going to be a tutorial on how to get a ball to bounce with squash and stretch. This rig allows you to make the ball squash and stretch pretty easily. You can take the top controller and move it up and down, and the ball will squash and stretch and maintain its volume. You can take the bottom controller and move it up and down, and the bottom will come up. To move the whole thing, you pick the squiggly line. It's a NURBS curve to move the entire ball around, up and down. And then to rotate the ball, you pick the controller in the middle and you can rotate the ball. I got this rig off of Creative Crash and then I modified it slightly to suit my needs. So to get started, we're going to have the ball just bounce up and down in a straight line in the y-axis and squash and stretch, and then later we can make it move to the side in the x-axis and have it roll for the last part. The first thing I'm going to do is check my animation preferences in Maya. The animation preferences are over in the right hand button here by the auto key button. Select that button and I want to check my settings. I want to make sure I'm at 30 frames a second. I animate at 30 frames per second. That's what I'm used to in game animation. If you're going to animate and film, you'd use 24 frames a second. And under animation, I could start off with linear keys. We're going to cover linear keys and tangents in this tutorial as well. And another important thing is your time slider. Make sure you have the time slider set to real time 30 frames a second. A lot of people will set Maya in the beginning. It'll be at play every frame, and that doesn't actually show you the real time animation. So make sure you have those settings done. You want to go to settings, make sure you're at 30 frames a second. Under animation, change your keys to linear. I'm going to turn auto key on as well. And then under time slider, have it set to real time 30 frames a second. I'm going to start off by picking the main controller and just hit the W button to move it up, and we're just going to move it up a little bit. That's going to be the start of our animation. And I'm going to select all the controllers and hit the S button to set a key. Even though I have auto key turned on, you have to set a key first on all the objects that you want to have keys later on when you move them. You can see that objects have keys because when you select an object, the channels on the right show up in this red color. Also, the key tick down here, this little red mark, shows you that you have a key. So we're going to start it, hit the S button to set a key, and then I'm going to move my time slider over. Maybe it's going to take 15 seconds to fall, or 15 frames, pardon me. My animation is going to be maybe 90 frames long, which would be 3 seconds at 30 frames a second. So I'm going to take the main controller and just drag it down to the ground. You could also just type in 0 because this control was set up so 0 is at the ground. We want to select everything and set a key. Now if we want the ball to squash, we could have the ball first stretch up a little bit. It'll make it look a little cartoony, but it should be fun. So we're going to have that stretch up a little bit, and then the very next frame we're going to have it squash down. Maybe we'll take 2 frames, that way you can see it a little easier. So 2 frames, it's going to squash down, and then I'm going to select everything and key it. Now if we want to check out our keys, we can just scroll back and see it's 0. It's at the top. As we move down, it's going to stretch up, and then in 2 frames it's going to hit the ground and squash. You can use the less than or greater than keys, which are also the comma and the period keys, to toggle between your keyframes. So I have it at 0, it's at the top. Here it's stretched up a little bit to anticipate our squash, and then it's going to squash, and then now we're going to have it shoot back up. To make it look snappier, some people might actually move over a frame and have the top stretch back up. That'll make your ball look really rubbery or gooey. If you want to have it have a good snap, we could take our ball and make sure it goes back to its default position, its round shape. So I'm going to select the top one and type in 0. If you type in 0 for the controllers, it goes back to its default shape. And then I'll take the ball and move it up a bit. So if you look at our keys, we have it in the air, stretched up, squashed down, and then back up in its normal position. We could just take this actually and move it all the way close to the top, key it, and then to move a key, this could be our top key. You could select the key with the shift button, drag select over it, and move your middle mouse button. Now remember, when the ball goes up, it's not gonna go up as high, and it won't take as long. So let's move this over to sometime around 20, the 20 area. So that'll be the top, and then we can have it go down. If it takes, I have it from frame 17 to 28. That's 11 frames to go up. It should take 11 frames to go down. A natural object will take just as long to go up as it does to go down. So we're going to have it take 11 frames to go down. That would be at 39. So at 39, we'll take the object, have it go down. I can just type 0. And we can have it stretch up just a little bit. It should lose its stretchiness as it goes on because we're going to have it bounce and die down. So we'll have it stretch up just a little bit. I'm going to key everything, and then in the very next frame or 2 frames later, maybe the very next frame, I'll have it squashed down just a little bit, not as much as before. I'm going to key everything, and then I'll have it bounce up one more time. I'm going to only have it take a couple frames to bounce up, maybe just 7. So let's go to 47. Have it go up just a little bit. Select the one on the top, type in 0 so it maintains its volume, and hit a key, and then it takes 7 frames to go down, so that would be at 54. Type 0 in for this, and just have it stretch up just a little bit. Select everything and set a key. I'm going to have it go and squash down in just 1 frame, so just be a little squash like that. And then if you want to stop your animation, we could just have it go in 1 more frame or 2 more frames and have it go back into its normal position. So this is the basic animation. We could go through and look at our keyframes using the less than or greater than sign. So at the start, it's at the top, then it goes down and stretches out, it goes down and flattens on the ground, pops back up into the air and maintains its original shape, goes back down, stretch a little bit, squashes a little bit, goes back up, maintains its volume in its round shape, goes back down, stretches just a little bit, stretches down just a little bit, and then goes back to its normal spot. Now that I set my keyframes, I'm going to go back and see how the animation looks. So I'll hit the rewind button and I'll hit play and see if it looks like a bouncing ball. It does. It looks really linear, but that's because my keys are set to linear. We can go in the graph editor and take a look at this motion and see that it is in fact linear. So I'm going to pause it and let's select the main controller and open up the graph editor. It's under Window Animation Editor, Graph Editor. And with the main controller selected, we see that in Y translation, our motion is linear. So to change this, we can select all of our keys here, drag select over it, and turn it into splines. Those are curvy lines. And then by default, it'll make it really curvy, but we'll also find some dips here. On the bottom, we don't want it to go under the ground. The 0 represents the ground layer or ground level. So the quick way to do this is to select these keys on the bottom and turn them to linear. Go ahead and use this button to turn them into linear. You can have each key can have a different kind of tangent or way it interpolates between the 2 keys. I'm going to turn this one into a plateau. That way it'll start off slow and then start to speed up as it hits the ground. To make it speed up even more, we can select this key and let's hit our break tangent. Usually the in tangent and out tangent are stuck together. You can select the tangent and use your middle mouse button to adjust this, and you see that both move at the same time. If you want to break this, you hit the break tangent button right there, And now I can move my in tangent independently of my out tangent. So I'm going to have my out tangent be flat and my in tangent be sharp. I'm going to do the same thing for all these. I want to break the tangents and make sure that on this one my out tangent is pretty sharp, and this one my in tangent will be sharp. Same thing with this. Use your middle mouse button to move the tangents, and this is our last little bounce here. Make sure you have the W key, the transform tool, selected to do this. So this will be our Y motion. We'll take a look to see how that looks. It should look better. There you go. It accelerates and decelerates and doesn't look bad. I'm going to take a look at my top squash controller in the graph editor and adjust these tangents as well. It's just moving in Y, so I'm going to select these keys, and I want to make them spline as well. I'm going to hit the spline button, and you can see that it turns into a squiggly line. Now, I don't want to overshoot. If your curve goes up past beyond what your next key is, that's an overshoot. So I'm going to hit the plateau button on this. I'll plateau this as all of my ones on the top. I'm going to plateau. That looks a little better. So now let's take a look at it. Hit the play button. It looks pretty good. I think it squashes way too much in the beginning, and also since I only set the top and bottom keys on this, I get a common problem in beginning animation where you don't get out of your squash before you don't get out of your squash soon enough. It looks like a pancake flying up after it hits the ground. So we're going to have to set a couple more keys. After it hits the ground here, we don't want it to fly up and look like a pancake. So I'm going to have it in the very next frame. I want it to go back to its original shape. So I'm going to take the Y value and hit 0. It'll pop back into its original shape. We can take a look on the graph editor and see what that did. It set a key in Y, and I want to flatten that out. And then we can take a look at the next time it hits the ground. We don't want it to be flat in the air, so after it squashes down, the very next frame, we're going to flatten it out. And then in your graph editor, we can make these tangents flat as well. Now let's take a look. That looks pretty good. I think it flattens out a bit too much, so what we can do is just make that value less in the graph editor. So this value down here, if you want to move the value without moving the time, use your middle mouse button to move it, hold shift, and it constrains it by going up. So I'm holding shift and I'm making that squash less, about half as much. I'll make this anticipation less as well, because your motion should decay as it goes down. Let's give it one final look. That's not bad. We can turn off our NURBS curves under show and then turn off NURBS curves to see it without the controllers on it. So that's not bad up and down. The next step, we're going to have it go across the screen in X and do a little bit of rotation, have it roll as well. Let's turn back on our NURBS controllers by holding down the space bar. Go to show and NURBS curves, and we're going to have it go across the screen in X. So I'm going to pick this controller, and in the beginning I'm going to have it go over here, and then at the end I want it to be on the right hand side. Since I set a key here in X, this is where it's going to end up on my very next key, and then it's going to stay there. But at the end I want it to be over here, so I'm going to drag it over there in X, and it'll set a key because I have auto key set on. Now we can take a look at it. It'll move, and then it'll stick, and then it'll fly back over to the side. I want to have a nice gradual move in X, like someone threw the ball. So I'm going to do that in my graph editor. I'm going to look at translate X and see the key that I moved it to the side, and then these are flat, and then it goes back over to the end. I'm going to delete the keys in the middle. Now you can delete the keys in X and it'll still have the ones in Y that we have. So you can have keys independently on different channels. You can have more keys in Y than you have in X if you want to. Now this motion is really linear. I want the ball to look like it's thrown to the side and then slowly moving down. So I'm going to plateau this last key. I'm going to have it like that, and then I'm going to use my tangent here to make it start off kind of fast and then slow down. Let's take a look to see what that looks like. It gets thrown to the side and then stops. I might want to have my ball stop a little sooner, but once we get it to roll, we can actually fix that. So let's go ahead and hide my NURBS curves and give it one more play. That doesn't look bad. The last thing we need to do is rotate it. So we do that with that controller in the middle. We'll go back, turn on our NURBS curves, pick this in the middle, and we have a bunch of keys on here, as you can see. When you select an object, it shows the keys on this. So I'm going to delete all these keys because I haven't actually rotated it yet. With the shift button and then hit delete. Make sure you don't actually use the delete button on your keyboard. That'll actually delete your object. So I have my ball started off here. Let's rotate it at some kind of random angle. And then at the end of the animation, I'm going to have it rotate 2 or 3 times. I'm just going to select the controller and then rotate it a few times like this. And you can see our values like -370, so that'll be 1 rotation. Maybe we want to have it rotate a little more. That'll be 1.5 turns. So I just have 2 keys for my rotation, and we'll take a look to see what that looks like. Not bad. It doesn't rotate very much, but it should get the job done. Maybe we can rotate it a little bit more. Go to my last key and just put a little more rotation on it. And to finish up the look of it, let's go back to our graph editor and take a look at our rotation. Right now our rotation is linear because my keys are still set to linear when I create them. So most of my motion's going in Z. So I'm going to make the end of my Z motion plateau so it'll slow down when it rolls. And let's pick my X as well. It moves just a little bit, so I'm going to plateau this. And plateau the Y. The Y doesn't move much either. We'll plateau that. Move this back. And let's take a look. This should be close to our final animation here. Throwing the ball, rolling, and it stops. So for a basic ball bounce, this a little bit cartoony because it squashed and stretched quite a bit. And it's kind of slow, so it looks kind of like a heavy ball. But we started off just with the up and down motion in Y. We animated the squash and stretch on that, adjusted the keys in the graph editor by starting off with linear keys and turning them into splines at the top, so it'd be nice, would have nice ease in and ease outs, and on the bottom we kept them linear. So if you look at those again, we'll see in Y translation, nice spline curves and then linear curves in the bottom. Make sure it doesn't dip on the bottom. We plateaued those. And then in the rotate, we had them just 1 key in the beginning and 1 key at the end, plateaued those off. And for translation, in the x-axis, we did the same thing. There's only 2 keys. There's 1 here at the start and 1 there at the bottom. Now, to finish this off, you want to do a play blast to see what it really looks like. To make a play blast, to see what your animation looks like, we'll go and first let's turn off our NURBS curves. And then I'll go to Window, Play Blast, go to the options, the little box on the side, take a look. AVI is fine. You can change it from render settings. This will make it kind of small. You can also just pick your own resolution, like 640 by 480. Browse to a location where you want to have it go. And then hit apply. What this does is it just uses your video output of Maya and just records frame by frame what your animation is. Wait for it to be done, and then it'll pop it up and we can take a look at it. One thing to remember too is the compression in Maya, it doesn't compress it very much. So I'll go back and use QuickTime Pro and use the H.264 compression to make this look better. So here's my animation. You hit Control L in QuickTime, it'll loop it. So that's what it looks like. And then to export it, we'll go to File, Export, and we'll go to the options, the default options, H.264, fine, and hit OK. And I'm going to save this out to my desktop. And this file should be a lot smaller than the other one. If you're going to email these files to people or put them up on a website, you want your files to be small. This file is only 128K. Go ahead and open it. And we'll see that the animation should play back better too. There we go. There's our animation file. So hopefully you guys learned how to do a basic ball squash and stretch in Maya, bouncing across the screen. Remember, you can just do the Y motion first and then add X to it to the side, and then finally add rotation. Thanks for watching. This was Nathan Webb.